Awesome. So first, it's important to kind of explain what do we mean by memory, because we actually have two memory systems. And when cognition and thinking and memory was reintroduced into the study of psychology, it was at the beginning of the computer revolution of starting to use computers more often to store and retrieve information. And based on what humans came up with for a computer system, very much we feel mimic our natural memory systems. Okay. Because with a computer, we have two types of memories, right? We have what's called RAM, or random access memory. This is the memory that is used to run the programs and to work with the programs or the game or the video. It's the memory that is used to kind of work with information. Okay. And then we have the hard drive. The hard drive stores that information once we're done working with it relatively permanently. Okay. So, and it's kind of felt that the human system works very similarly to what we created with the computer system, that we have this short term, it's also called working memory, where we manipulate and work with information as it comes in. And then we try to transfer it, hopefully, if we want to, anyways, transfer it to the long term memory or the hard drive, to where if we need that information again, we can retrieve it back from that system. Okay, so if you could probably guess, this means that there's pretty much three phases of memory. The first one is encoding. So this is getting information into the system. If you think about what we have talked about in this class so far, this is kind of that sensations and perceptions conversation that we had, where we're getting sensory information in. If we think about it again using the computer analogy, so this is typing on the keyboard and putting information in, or if you're recording auditorily or video and you're putting that information in, that's a sensation part. And then the perception part is transferring that information from physical stimuli, such as light waves, into electrical chemical actions, neural actions. Okay. This is where we do differentiate between computer systems and human systems. Human systems often work on a neural system with multiple pathways, where computers, when you type it into the screen, it's putting it into a binary code. It transfers that information very differently than we do. Okay, so that's the encoding part. Okay, and then we have to do something with that information. So usually, if you think about, let's say we're writing a paper in Microsoft Word, and we've worked hard on it, and then we hit the save button because that information is important to us. So that's the storage part. How do we get that information, use it, have it in some useful form that then later on we can retrieve it for further use? Okay. And then, of course, the retrieval part is going and finding that program or that file that we use, okay, that we used in the past. In each of these phases, we're going to see that there's different levels of processing that the brain and we do in order to work with memories. One important aspect that I do just want to bring up really quick is, just like with sensations and perceptions, you'll remember that I said there's not a one-to-one association between your sensory experiences and how you are perceiving and experiencing that sensory information, meaning that we don't have a reality. Our perceptions are not really the reality of what we're sensing in a lot of ways. Okay, it's a buildup. Memories are very much the same way. Memories can be changed based upon our mood, our current place in our world right now, whether we're doing better than we were when that memory was made or worse off than when that memory is made. We do tend to see, remember the more positive aspects of relationships as we get older and older and older. That's why if you see a lot of, if you know, kids who had awful, awful, awful parents tend to or can become that parent's caretaker in that parent's older years because the memories change from that awful memory to they become more and more peaceful and more accepting. Okay, so memories are not a exact collection of experience. Memories change based upon our current situation. Okay, probably one of the best examples of this was research that was done on 9/11. And we will talk about this thing called flashbulb memories. Okay, and so a lot of times people, if you ask where they were when the Challenger space shuttle blew up, or where were you when JFK was, and I know a lot of us weren't here yet, but current research is where were you on 9/11, and people often have a very vivid kind of what we call a flashbulb or a flash memory that is very real to them, and they can see themselves and feel like they have an exact memory of what happened when the planes hit the Twin Towers. Okay. The interesting thing is that based upon the person's situation, other memories that are completely unrelated actually can encroach. So, for example, one gentleman was talking about because his baseball team also won the World Series that year, and his flashbulb memory that he swore is completely and totally factual is that he was sitting and watching one of the game three of the World Series during when he heard that the Twin Towers had been flown into. Okay, problem with that is the World Series wasn't even playing at that time, and they don't play any of the games in that early morning period at all. And so that flashbulb memory that the person says was there, what it wasn't even possible physically in time and space. Okay, but we find that a lot with a lot of trauma memories is that emotional situations that often occur during similar periods of time tend to become very entwined with each other. So a month or so later, that gentleman's team did win the World Series, and it was close enough in time to be then memory associated with what happened on 9/11. So just some things to kind of think about when you think about memories and whatnot. We'll have some other examples as we move along. Okay. So when we are doing encoding, we do need to talk about things like automatic and effortful encoding. And we have to look at the role of attention, which we've kind of already talked about. I just want to bring back some of the things that we talked about when we talked about selective attention, divided attention, and sustained attention, which again, we've already looked at when we looked at consciousness. So this is just basically a review. We encode both automatically, meaning that there are some things about our experiences that are automatically put into our long-term memory. Okay. If we want to think about this on just a simple everyday thing, it might be a really funny joke that a friend told this morning, and you go home and you tell your roommate or your partner or whoever there, you probably didn't effortlessly kind of, oh, I got to remember this, and kept repeating it over and over. It may have been so emotional that on an automatic level it was encoded and you could easily retrieve it when you got home at the end of that day. Okay. Other things that are automatically encoded is information we need for survival purposes. Okay. So, probably the best example of this is if you had a car driving at you at 50 miles per hour, you probably wouldn't want to sit there and try and force your memory and try to kind of figure out what you should do. You're probably going to just jump out of the way and automatically, without even thinking about the consequences or what's going to happen next or anything else, you usually would just automatically get out of the way. You put your hand on a stove that's hot, you're probably not going to sit there and go, geez, I wonder how bad this is going to burn. You probably automatically, I hope, automatically take your hand off of the hot burner. Okay. Um, and in a lot of ways, our world is automatic, and we don't think about things at all. Okay. And I think I brought this up in this class again, but one thing that I would challenge you to do is maybe next time you go out to your car, make every single decision you need to make in order to get into the car and just turn it on. Okay. That as you normally would do. If you were to count the number of exact decisions you'd have to make, it'd be somewhere between 450 to about 750 different decisions you make in order just to open the door to your car, get in it, put a seatbelt on, and turn the car on. There's somewhere around 450 to 750 decisions that we make doing just that task. And if you could imagine, if we had to do that in an effortful way every time, I think we would still be somewhere in the Stone Ages as far as human development is. We probably would have been eaten by lions or something even before we would even make it to building shelters and making fire. I think we would have been extinct long before that. Okay. Now, we will talk about in social psychology what happens when we rely too much on our automatic system, because we do. There's a terms used in psychology where we say human beings in general are cognitively lazy. Okay, meaning that if we can take an easy route to process information and make a decision, we will through the automatic system. Effortful encoding, it takes a lot of energy and is very exhausting. Okay. I want you to think about last time maybe you physically exercised and the last time you had to really sit down and really study. I'm willing to bet that in both of those cases, when you were done, you were probably more physically exhausted from the studying than you were the exercise. Okay. Reason being is that if you think about the brain system, one, it uses glucose for energy. Okay. And two, if we look at how much even our brain, even though it's only a couple grams big, it consumes about 20% of our body's energy when in use. Okay. So if you think about the size to ratio to the body, our brain is an energy hog, as you would say. And when we engage in effortful thinking, that system has to use that much more energy and that much more glucose in order to process information. Okay. And yes, this is why people who do study classes and stuff encourage you to have sugared, not processed sugared, but like fruits like apples and oranges and stuff that has really natural sugars in it when you study, because that will actually help feed your furnace system that you got going and help you through the study. Um, okay. Anyways, so when we get to social psychology, we will talk about when we over rely on the automatic systems, we tend to make certain errors in our social judgments. Okay. We'll talk about how when we rely too much on the system, how we can fall fallacy to things like what's called the confirmation bias or the ultimate attribution error. Okay, confirmation bias is when we rely too much on our automatic system, we tend to either unconsciously, sometimes consciously, ignore information that is counter to our belief or the notion we currently have. Okay. So, for example, if I believe I'm going to have a bad day today, I will probably unconsciously ignore anything that happens that's positive. That's an example of a confirmation bias. But other confirmation biases, especially when it comes to social judgment, is when we judge, for example, the intelligence of someone based on our previously held beliefs about them, our idea that they're going to behave this way because of previously held beliefs, and we may ignore everything else that they're doing that is different from what we expect them to do. Okay. Ultimate attribution error is there's two parts to the ultimate attribution error. The first part is the assumption that people who are not like us are more similar to each other than people who are like us. So, for example, if your identity is strongly seeped into being a man, okay, and that's really an important part of your identity, you will assume that women are more like each other than are men. Men are more diverse, different thinking processes, different everything. And you will more likely think this when you're not really effortlessly choosing to really process information. The other part of the ultimate attribution error is we can make the assumption that when someone does something good, someone else does something good, it's because of the situation. Okay. But when someone else does something stupid, it's about the quality and the disposition of the person. Okay. On the other end round, when something good happens to oneself, more likely to say it's because of your work ethics, your qualities, your personality, your strong perseverance in life, and when things don't go right, when you experience a failure, you're more likely to blame it on something that is external or situational. It's because the teacher was unfair. My employer is an a-hole. We make situational things for ourselves, but give dispositional qualities when other people fail. It's because they're lazy. It's because they're stupid. It's because they don't know how to work. Okay. Um, but when they succeed again, we say, oh, it's because they got lucky, or it wouldn't have happened if that person wasn't there too, or it's because they have money, or it's because, or some other thing that is external to them. And we're more likely, and I'm just bringing this up because we'll get into these topics, we're more likely to make that error when we use that automatic system, when we put things on auto drive. We're more likely to view the world in a singular way, and we're more likely to make judgmental errors about other people and even ourselves when we kind of over rely on this automatic system. Okay. So, as mentioned, when we're doing encoding, there's three levels of encoding. I think there's a better example of it right here. So shallow processing is that you just notice the physical perceptual features. You don't really analyze anything. And so this is a good example of shallow down to deep processing is if you walk down the sidewalk, for example, and you get back from your walk and someone at your house asks, so did you see anything cool? And you just kind of say, yeah, I saw some cars and some trees and a few flowers, but you really don't give any real, that's kind of what I saw. This is when someone, if someone has a day and you ask her, how was your day? And they go, it was fine. Sometimes you just do that to avoid the conversation, but other times it's because a lot of times we just kind of go through our world, kind of doing the shallow processing of stuff. Because again, it takes more and more in-depth energy to come down into this depth of processing. So intermediate processing is recognizing the stimuli and giving them labels. So the community I live in right now, I think me and the people across the street and maybe one other person are the only ones on our street that don't own a truck. So when I go for walks, I kind of notice all the trucks. Like that's a Chevy, that's a Ford. Just because there's something that is not is kind of it's been strange. I've never lived in a neighborhood where there's so many truck owners. But anyways, so I recognize. So if I were to ask my wife when I came home from a walk and she asked, "Hey, what did you see?" I would definitely say, "Well, I noticed all of the Chevys and the Ford trucks, and I noticed they blocked the view of this person's house over there, da 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 da," and I might create a little bit of a story behind them. Why? Because those objects tend to be something that is unique and something that I didn't ever really recognize in other neighborhoods I've lived in. And so it's something unique. Okay. Now, so we do kind of play between shallow and intermediate processing a lot of the time. Deep processing is when you really give meaning to something. You really think about it and you really spend time really looking at your experience. Okay. So again, go for a walk, come back, and I'll use these cars and whatnot. Well, I'll use so come back and my wife asks, "Hey, what did you see?" I might bring up, there's this guy over here. I can't remember what street it is, but he has a '66 Mustang. I had a '66 Mustang when I was a kid, and the colors almost were exactly the same. It's a powder blue. Mine was kind of a silver blue, da da da, and give it real meaning because my first car was one of those. So I would provide much more meaning to it. I would probably think about it more, and I would associate it with my own past experiences and whatnot. So that probably would have been a more meaningful walk in some way, experiencing that. And that's deep processing, is when we really provide meaning for our experiences and we tie it back to previous experiences that we've already had. It's called hooking or hooking your knowledge into something you already have experienced. Okay. And again, I think this is a good point. I think I want to do this. This is a good point to kind of stop and really focus on memories. I'm going to stop sharing for just a moment.